Good morning. This is Tracy, Hails Fast, right on Four Corners. Today, I'm excited to talk to Rebecca Roanhorse about her book, Trail of Lightning. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Well, I really enjoyed Trail of Lightning and Maggie Hosky. She's great, complex character.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Would you take just a minute or so and tell our audience a little bit what the book is about?
Sure. So this is a science fiction and fantasy book, somewhere in between what they call a science fantasy book. But it's an apocalyptic fantasy that takes place in the near future. There's been a climate apocalypse where most of the world has sort of collapsed under climate change and flooding and earthquakes. But the Southwest, the American Southwest, specifically the Navajo Nation, has survived and is actually thriving and doing well. So this story takes place wholly on the Navajo Nation, Dinétah, in the book, which has risen up sort of in power. But with that rising has come the gods and the heroes and the monsters of Navajo traditional stories. And so they walk the land and they interact with the characters. And the story follows Maggie Hosky, as you said, who is the main character, and she is a monster hunter.
Right.
And so the book is about her and her fighting monsters, both outside and her own internal monsters.
Yes. I was going to say she definitely has her own internal monsters to battle also.
Absolutely.
She's not the most lovable person.
No, she is a difficult person, and I always say that it's okay if people don't like her, particularly at the beginning, because I don't think she likes herself very much.
Right.
She really has to go on a journey of self-discovery to figure out, who she is, and to get deal with some of the trauma in her earlier life and what's led her to the situation that she's in now.
And you reveal her backstory and so craftily with all the action that's happening. I mean, it really doesn't ever have a dull moment to it.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to hear.
Oh, yeah. I really enjoyed it. Let me ask you this. You say in your fly that you're Owigna Pueblo. And
Owigna.
Sorry, I didn't pronounce it well.
That's okay.
And what made you choose to write about Dene?
Sure. Well, my husband is Dene, and I married into his family over a decade ago. And I'd been at law school. I went to UNM Law School, and I studied Indian law. And I'd taken a class in Navajo law, and then I had clerked at the Navajo Supreme Court for a summer. And then my first law job was actually in Window Rock. In legal aid.
Mm-hmm.
So I was living on the reservation. I was living with my in-laws, and I just sort of fell in love with the culture and the people and everything about it. And it was really my life. Still is my life. We spend a lot of time. We go back to visit my in-laws. We go back for special occasions and holidays. And so I've really just, the Dene and Navajo culture and Navajo folks have just become, my extended family. Those are my people. I really, consider that. I'm much closer to my Navajo in-laws than I am to my Pueblo side.
And your knowledge of the Navajo culture is very clear in this, and the language too.
Yes, yeah. I really made an effort to try to learn the language. I think that's only right if especially working in the courts and, being out there working with elders and things like that. I really tried to educate myself and be respectful and be, part of the culture and learn the language, which is a beautiful language. And besides, everyone around me was telling stories and talking in Navajo, and, I was the one that was sort of left out. So I was like, oh no, if I want to keep up, I better learn the language.
Well, it's not easy to learn that, so you've done well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I still get I had a judge once tell me I spoke Navajo like John Wayne. And I sounded really, really flat. So I'm
That's okay.
trying. I'm trying.
That's okay. And this is just the first of how many of the Sixth World books will there be?
There will be 4 altogether. So this is
Great.
the first one, Trail of Lightning. The second one, Storm of Locusts, will come out in April of 2019.
Great.
And then after that, there'll be 2 more.
Good deal, because you've definitely left a lot of things open there at the ending.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a cliffhanger, I will admit.
Yes.
But it gets resolved fairly quickly in the next book, and we sort of move on.
Good. I can't wait. Would you like to read a little bit for us?
Sure. So I've actually, let's see, I picked out 2 passages, very brief passages to read. So I'll just start actually with chapter 1.
Okay.
And
great.
to give listeners sort of a flavor of the book. And again, this is about monster hunting. And so we start with Maggie, our main character.
Great.
And this is chapter 1 of Trail of Lightning.
Okay.
The monster has been here. I can smell him. His stench is part the acrid sweat of exertion, part the meaty ripeness of a carnivore's unwashed flesh, and part something else I can't quite name. It fouls the evening air, stretching beyond smell to something deeper, more base. It unsettles me, sets my own instincts howling and warning. Cold sweat breaks out across my forehead. I wipe it away with the back of my hand. I can also smell the child he's stolen. Her scent is lighter, cleaner, innocent. She smells alive to me, or at least she was alive when she left here. By now, she could smell quite different. The door to the Lukachukai chapter house swings open. A woman, likely the child's mother, sits stone-faced in an old dented metal folding chair at the front of the small meeting room. She's flanked by a middle-aged man in a silver-belly cowboy hat and a teenage boy in army fatigue who looks a few years younger than me. The boy holds the woman's hand and murmurs in her ear. Most of the town of Lukachukai is here too, for support or for curiosity or because they are drawn to the spectacle of grief. They huddle in groups of 2 or 3, hunched in morose clumps on the same battered gray chairs, breathing in stale air made worse by the bolted-up windows and the suffocating feel of too many people in too small a space. They are locals, Navajos, or Dene as we call ourselves, whose ancestors have lived at the foothills of the Shuska Mountains for more generations than the Bilaganas have lived on this continent, who can still tell stories of relatives broken and murdered on the long walk for an Indian boarding school like it was last year, who have likely never traveled off the reservation, even back when it was just a forgotten backwater ward of the United States and not Deneta risen like it is today. These Dene know the old stories sung by the Hatali, the ancient legends of monsters and the heroes who slew them, even before the monsters rose up out of legend to steal village children from their beds. And now they are looking to me to be their hero. But I'm no hero. I'm more of a last resort, a scorched earth policy. I'm the person you hire when the heroes have already come home in body bags. And I'll stop there.
Great. That's great. She is a hero. She's the reluctant hero.
She is absolutely the reluctant hero,
Yep.
but she has to, that is her journey, right? To sort of realize what it is to be a hero and to take on that mantle.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so she has 4 books to get there.
Well, she's on her way. Yeah, I was definitely feeling sympathy for her toward the end of this one. Absolutely. She's a great, well-rounded character.
Oh, good. That's great to hear.
I know people like that all the time. And she's a strong woman. That's one thing I really liked about this book was the strong woman protagonist.
Yes. Yeah, so she is definitely physically strong, as in, like, she kills monsters and she has superpowers that come from, her clan.
Right.
And then, she's no dummy either.
Right.
She's pretty smart, and she's able to keep up. She's a little, limited on her emotional side. That's where she does a lot of her learning, like how to form relationships and, and how to deal with people. But that's pretty relatable, honestly. I think a lot of us struggle with that.
I agree. Yeah, she kicks butt and takes names, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting that you've chosen what you call the big water as the final apocalypse. Did you purposely pick these issues as environmentalism for this backdrop?
A little bit yes, I guess, and a little bit no. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it made sense to me. Like, it felt natural. Like, if I were going to think about what the end of the world would look like, climate change seems imminent.
Yeah.
But along with that, I think, in Navajo traditional stories, often the waters rise at the end of one world, and people leave that, or the creatures leave that, beings leave that, and go to the next world. So it made sense also within sort of this framework of Navajo traditional stories that if we were in the fifth world now, that the sixth world would begin with a flood. And of course, that's just my imagination. I'm not trying to tell anybody, anything about Navajo stories. That's just fiction.
Right.
But it made sense to me. And then also in the book are these ideas, that there's a war around pipelines and fossil fuels, and that aids also, the coming apocalypse.
Right. Right. And I think it's fascinating that Deneta they started to build walls, and then the walls built themselves. And they are of the four sacred mountains and colors.
Right. Yeah. So the idea in the book is that there is some sort of presence or foresight from the tribal council that sees sort of things coming, the way of the world as it was, and they decide to build a wall to protect Deneta. So when things go wrong, they'll have some protection. And some of the things that sort of motivate that are not only the wars, the fracking wars, but the federal government threatening to dissolve trust land, which is something that's actually we see happening around us. That's happening to a tribe in Connecticut, or they're threatening to do that. So sort of real world problems that I've turned in, to fiction to be able to talk about them.
Right.
And so they build the wall, and the wall is a little bit like, I guess, a nod to the wall that the United States wants to build now on its southern border.
Right.
And sort of playing with that idea. But in my book, the indigenous people are the ones that are building the wall to keep the rest of the world out instead of vice versa.
Right.
To just sort of play with that idea. But in my book, of course, the indigenous people, the Dene, are rising. They're not. So the wall is beautiful. The wall isn't, some ugly concrete thing with barbed wire at the top. The wall is there as a sort of manifestation of the power of the land around them. So yes, it rises in the four sort of sacred mountains, a part of that, and it's for protection, right? But at the same time, it brings unexpected results or unexpected side effects, I should say, I guess, where all the sort of traditional stories come to life and are surrounding, the people.
Right. Outside the wall is the Berkey, which is Albuquerque. Is that what?
Oh yeah, the Berkey.
Berkey, right? That's Albuquerque. Is it like the party town?
No, so in the book, Albuquerque has fallen into city-state, sort of based around the land grant families,
right?
Hispanic land grant families in New Mexico. So that's sort of what's happened to it in the wake of the apocalypse. And that is, and so one of the main characters, Maggie's sidekick, or partner, Kai, Arviso, comes from Albuquerque. He's Dene as well, but he grew up in Albuquerque. And so you get a little glimpse of what's happened there. And, of course, the big commodity there is water.
Right.
And so these barony land grant families sort of think of Renaissance Italy or something with these families have risen to power and are sort of vying over natural resources, specifically water. And so we'll see more of that actually in book 3.
Oh, good.
So book one takes place wholly in Denata, within the walls we were talking about. Book two, we actually leave Denata and we travel down Route 66 through northern Arizona.
Oh.
So we get to see sort of what's left of the rest of the world, that area of the world, in the wake of the apocalypse. And we go to Page, and we get to, on the road trip from Lupton to Page, you get to sort of see, all these different places along the way that people will recognize, and, hopefully get a kick out of, seeing
right
turned into fiction. And then in book three, our characters are actually going to go to the Borgay, and they're going to deal with some of the land grant family.
Oh, good. Yeah.
In the future Hispanic culture and some Pueblo influence.
Good.
And some other things.
You've won quite a few awards for this already.
For my short fiction, actually, not for the book. The book has only been out a couple of months.
Oh, that's right.
But I did win two pretty big awards for my short fiction.
Yes. Talk about that. The Hugo Nebula.
Yeah. So I won this past August. I won a Hugo Award for Best Short Story.
Congratulations.
And then in April, I think it was, or April or May, I won the Nebula. And so the Hugo is sort of like the Oscar, I guess, for science fiction and fantasy nerds.
It is.
Yes, and I guess, the Nebula is sort of right up there with Golden Globe or something,
right.
Whatever the other big award is. And I wrote a short story called Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience, trademark, which you can find online for free at apexmagazine.com.
APEX?
Yes,
okay.
APEX-magazine.com. And for folks who like to listen, LeVar Burton of Reading Rainbow and Star Trek fame, he has a podcast called LeVarBurtonReads.com. And he recently read the short story for his podcast. And it's just, he did a great job. He's a wonderful storyteller. They added special effects, like sound effects and things, and he just really brought the story to life. So if you're interested, you can read it at apex-magazine.com or at LeVarBurtonReads.com. You can listen to it. And that's the short story that's won the award. People
that's great.
Seem to really like it.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. So you have been writing for a while and practicing law?
Writing, I've been a lawyer for a little over 10 years, I guess, something like that. And writing I've been doing my entire life. Like ever since I was, in grade school, I've always been a huge reader, science fiction and fantasy, and a writer, but always just as a hobby. I hadn't really thought about it as something I could do professionally, or honestly, even to get a book published. I hadn't really thought of that until 2013 when I started writing Trail of Lightning, and I joined a writing group, a local group here in Santa Fe, and these people had all had things published, small things or big things, different levels of publishing, and they encouraged me. They were like, "This is good. You should try to get this published." And I was like, "Really? Are you sure?" And then I went to a workshop called VONA, VONA, in 2015, and I workshopped the first few chapters with a group there with Marjorie Liu. She was the leader of our workshop, and she's won a ton of awards. She just won the Eisner this past year for her work on Monstrous, which is a graphic novel. And she loved it. She encouraged me. She's like, "Somebody's going to publish this. You need to finish it, and you need to send it out."
Great.
And so I did.
You did?
Yeah, and so that was really the first time I thought of myself as a professional or possibly a professional writer.
Well, good for you. Now, did the idea of Maggie Hosky start before the book started, or did the idea of the book start first?
Maggie Hosky came first. She was really the seed. Yeah, I think I was actually at a law conference sitting at, I think we were talking about, actually it was on federal Indian law.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting there doodling as someone was, up talking, and I was supposed to be listening to their lecture, but I was thinking to myself, there were a Navajo monster hunt, and what
Mm-hmm.
if this was the future, and what if her name, was Maggie? And it sort of went from there.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And what is your writing process?
Oh gosh, so when I'm working full time, which I'm doing,
Uh-huh.
I will often, you have to make it work. You have to fit in the writing where you can. And I also have a 10-year-old daughter,
Oh, dear.
who was even smaller when I started.
Mm-hmm.
So I have obligations around family.
Mm-hmm.
So I will often get up early, maybe 5 o'clock, and I'll write from 5 to 7, or make notes or whatever it is. Usually read over what I wrote the night before.
Mm-hmm.
Then at 7 o'clock, I'll stop and do what I have to do for the day. And then usually at night, maybe around 9 or 10, I'll come back to the writing, and I'll write till maybe 1 in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, and it varies. That's not an everyday schedule,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the general way I approach it. And I tend to plot out things. I tend to follow a 3-act structure.
Mm-hmm.
Plot out things to a certain degree, but leave enough wiggle room in there to try to let the story tell itself.
That's a good way to work.
And,
Yeah.
yeah.
So did you get hung up in spots and have to go running to do more research?
Not really for this book. This book knew what it wanted to be. And all the things, the stories and sort of the places and everything, I already knew really well.
Uh-huh.
I didn't feel like I had to do a whole lot of research. That just felt like lived experience was my research. But for book 2, I'll tell you, I did get stuck in that middle, what they call that muddy middle,
Right.
which is so infamous. And so what I actually did, and I was on a deadline now, I took 3 years to write Trail of Lightning, but I wrote Storm of Locusts, the second book, in, I think 9 months.
Oh, wow.
Because I was on deadline.
Yes.
And so I wrote the first part, the first act, and then I started to write the second act, and it just was going nowhere. Just, boring, slow, it just felt blah. So I stopped, and I wrote the third act. I wrote the end of the book so that I knew what my goals were, so that I knew
good.
where I needed to go, and what I wanted to accomplish, and what the characters needed to realize, and all that sort of stuff. And I wrote that, and then I went back and I wrote the second act. I wrote the middle. And that really seemed to help.
That's a good idea. That's a good plan.
Yeah, if you get stuck, definitely try it.
Yes.
It kind of saved me.
Those deadlines are writers' best friends and worst enemies.
Right. They force you to get creative and to try to make things work, but at the same time, gosh, yeah, you're under the gun.
You are. Well, your publishing house has been more than supportive of you in all our communications, so you're really lucky there.
Oh, well, that is great to hear.
Yes.
Yeah, I got some good people. I got an editor that really believed in the story and allowed me to tell the story that the way I wanted to. And Simon and Schuster and specifically Saga Press, which is the science fiction and fantasy imprint, have been great.
So you would call this genre indigenous futurism.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't familiar with that phrasing, but I like that, and that really fits with this.
Yeah, and I think the idea, a professor named Grace Dillon coined the term, and she's First Nations. And the idea, she pulled from the idea of Afrofuturism as well.
Oh.
And think of that as like Black Panther or something, right?
Right.
So visions of indigenous futurisms, in this case, that either are in dialogue with colonial or colonialism, or are completely sovereign and can create their own stories, pulling from their own cultural traditions and their own sort of way of life without even dialoguing with colonialism.
Oh.
I think that's sort of what you see in Black Panther, and I think that's sort of what I'm trying to do with my book, is write something that felt very Dene, that felt very didn't really have a lot of like Dene characters or any sort of European, sort of influence.
Right.
In the stories, no werewolves, no vampires,
Right.
things like
Right.
that, which you often see in this kind of fantasy. But also make it genre, make it exciting and fun and very visual, something you can sort of imagine on TV or, something like that, like a story that, particularly I think for young people,
Right.
it might be something that they would be interested in and drawn to, and maybe they would read this, and maybe that would get them interested in going to learn the real stories about Monster Slayer and Born for Water and some of the traditional stories. Because that's not what I'm doing. I'm drawing from that, but maybe that will get them interested to go talk to elders or go talk to people who can.
Well, there is the undercurrent of the old myths in this. They're just understood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I liked that part too. So you will be at the Indigenous Comic-Con in November?
Yes, I should be at I'm always around. I'm always sort of doing things. I was in Albuquerque last week at Page One Books. And then, if you want to check my schedule,
okay,
you can go to my website, which is RebeccaRoanhorse.com.
Okay, RebeccaRoanhorse.com.
RoanHorse, all one word, Rebecca Roanhorse. Okay. And I do have an events page, and I'm usually updating it when I'm scheduled for something new. So always check there. But yes, I will be at Indigenous Comic-Con the first week in November, and that should be a lot of fun.
This was the first I'd heard of an Indigenous Comic-Con. And what other characters are there?
Oh gosh, well, it's there's Lee Francis. He's Laguna Pueblo. He sort of created Indigenous Comic-Con, and he also runs a small publishing house out of Albuquerque called Native Reality.
Oh, okay.
And they do, and they publish mostly comic books with Native characters and Native heroes, and I know there are actually some Navajo creatives who are working in the comic book medium and writing hero twin stories. So that's a great place also for people to look if they want to learn something about the hero twins. He started Indigenous Comic-Con as a celebration for really just Indigenous folks who want to nerd out over their favorite science fiction and fantasy, the comic books. So it can be anything. It could be Star Wars. It could be Star Trek. But then there's also, like I said, Indigenous folks from all over the world, not just the United States, but Canada and Mexico and Hawaii and like all kinds of Indigenous people who are creating their own narratives around
exciting.
Superheroes and things like that. And so a lot of them show up, and then a lot of some actors and illustrators and writers and all kinds of folks. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. It really does.
Yeah.
Well, good. We're just about out of time, Rebecca. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I will say, again, that if you like Trail of Lightning, then Book 2, Storm of Locusts, is coming out in April. And then next fall of 2019, I have a children's book on the Rick Riordan Presents imprint coming out called Race to the Sun, which is about a 7th grader, Najoni Begay, and her little brother and her best friend, and they basically get to save the world.
Oh.
And that is for middle graders, so that's, sort of 8 to 12-year-olds.
And what's the title of that again?
Race to the Sun.
Race to the Sun. Great.
Yeah, and so that should be a lot of fun.
Oh, yes. Well, it's been a real pleasure, not just reading the book, but also talking to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I look forward to the next book.
Okay, great. I hope you like it.
And that was Rebecca Roanhorse, the author of Trail of Lightning, The Sixth World, Book 1. This is Tracy Hales-Vass, right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico. You can contact me at righton@sanjuancollege.edu.